The telegram arrives on a cold January morning in 1940, but the chill that enters the room has nothing to do with winter. Joan Clarke stands in the doorway of her small Cambridge lodging, fingers trembling as she reads the line that will divide her life into a before and an after. A friend she trusted, a man she once imagined a future with, has been killed in the chaos of wartime Europe. The message is brief, stripped of comfort. Loss in wartime is always delivered with speed, as if the truth might become easier if spoken quickly. She does not cry. Joan has always been the quiet one, the one who thinks before feeling, who solves before grieving. But inside her, something fractures. She closes the door gently, places the telegram on her desk beside her unfinished mathematical proofs, and sits in silence as the world reshapes itself. Years later, people will say, "She hides her grief well." They do not understand that she does not hide it at all. She simply buries it in work, and the work ahead will demand everything she has left. Before the war, Joan is not yet the woman who will break Hitler's most secret naval codes. She is a scholar at Newnham College, one of the very few women allowed to study mathematics at Cambridge. Her tutors describe her as astonishing, quick, methodical, able to see patterns others miss. She earns a first in the mathematical tripos, a distinction that should open any door in the country, but Cambridge does not award women full degrees until the late 1940s. She leaves the university brilliant, but officially invisible. It might have ended there, another mind hidden by the quiet prejudices of her time, if not for Gordon Welchman. He notices her precision, her gift for logic, her calm under pressure. When Britain begins recruiting mathematicians for work essential to the war effort, Welchman sends her name to a secret address in Buckinghamshire. The letter she receives says only that she is invited to contribute to government service and that no details can be discussed in writing. Still mourning, Joan accepts. In the weeks that follow, Britain trembles under the gathering storm. Poland has already been crushed. Germany's U-boats lurk across the Atlantic, hunting convoys with deadly ease. Every newspaper speaks of blackouts, rations, evacuations. Everyone feels the weight of something vast approaching. Joan prepares quietly, slipping deeper into her work, as if numbers might become a shield. On June 17, 1940, she boards a train to a place she has never heard of, Bletchley. The ticket is stamped with an address that does not exist on any public map. The journey is slow, the countryside dim under wartime restrictions. Passengers speak in whispers, as if afraid that even casual conversation might threaten national security. She steps off at the small station and sees a driver holding a sign with her name. No explanation, no introduction, only a nod toward the waiting car. The mansion appears suddenly, rising from behind thick hedgerows like something from a forgotten estate. Bletchley Park looks peaceful, almost indifferent to the war tightening around Europe. But the guards at the gate, the blackout curtains, the men with clipped voices and sharpened eyes tell a different story. If you're drawn to true, forgotten stories like this one, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next video. Inside, Joan is led down narrow corridors until she reaches a cramped wooden hut that smells of damp paper, machine oil, and sleeplessness. A man with an angular face and restless energy greets her without looking up from his notes. Alan Turing introduces himself in a distracted murmur, as if he is using only the fraction of attention he can spare. "You'll be in Hut 8, he says. "We attack the German naval Enigma, hardest problem we have." Only later does she learn that the German Navy uses a more advanced machine than the Army or Air Force. The U-boat Enigma carries extra settings, tighter discipline, and fewer mistakes. No one has yet cracked their daily keys. Allied losses grow each month in the Atlantic, and without a breakthrough, Britain's food supply may not survive the year. She is handed a pile of intercepted messages, pages of gibberish, rows of letters with no apparent meaning. Then she is shown the methods they hope might turn chaos into order. banburismus, a statistical attack that uses logic, probability, and one crucial ingredient, human intuition. Most people can't see the patterns, a cryptanalyst tells her. The calculations require a certain touch. Joan begins to work. 1 hour becomes 2. Lunchtime passes unnoticed. Her pencil moves slowly at first, then faster. The familiar hum of her mind returning to life feels like someone opening a window in a darkened room. She does not speak. She barely breathes. By evening, she has solved combinations that took others days. When she looks up, the room has gone silent. Someone whispers, "She's faster than Turing." No one corrects him. But as she walks back to her quarters that night, the victory feels hollow. She cannot share it. She cannot write it down. She cannot even tell her family what she does. Britain has placed its survival into the hands of a woman still carrying the weight of a life ripped away from her. She stands alone at her window, the blackout curtains drawn tight, listening to the distant rumble of aircraft heading toward the coast. Somewhere out there, men are fighting with guns, torpedoes, and bombs. Here, her battlefield is paper and silence. She does not yet know that her work will change the war. She does not yet know that she will succeed where so many have failed. She knows only this. Her grief is no longer her burden, it is her fuel. And tomorrow morning, she will return to Hut 8 to face the machine that holds the fate of thousands. The next morning, Joan walks into Hut 8 with the same steady composure she once carried through Cambridge examinations, but the atmosphere inside feels nothing like academia. This place is alive with tension. Every desk is buried under intercepted messages, every chalkboard scratched with half-erased ciphers, every scrap of paper a clue in a race against the clock. The air hums with the rattle of typewriters, the clack of bomb machines spinning through possibilities in neighboring huts, and the low murmur of minds fighting a battle no one outside these walls will ever see. Turing appears beside her without warning, as if he has materialized from the code books themselves. He hands her a stack of cribs, guessed plaintext phrases that analysts force against encrypted messages, hoping to create tiny fissures in the German naval Enigma. Weather reports, convoy announcements, repeated formatting choices, small, predictable mistakes that might save thousands of lives. Naval Enigma resets at midnight, he says. If we don't break today's key by the afternoon, everything in that pile becomes useless. The pressure is immense. Every 24 hours, the Germans change the settings of their machines. Every 24 hours, the work must begin again from zero. Joan listens carefully, absorbing the method, the patterns, the structure of the problem. She has always worked quickly, but here speed isn't talent, it's survival. The first days are overwhelming. Naval messages pour in coded on three-rotor machines, but rumors whisper through the huts that the Germans are experimenting with new modifications. Turing moves through Hut 8 with increasing urgency, hardly speaking, scribbling notes faster than anyone can read them. Welchman visits with tactical updates from other huts. Everywhere, people sense the grey shape of disaster gathering over the Atlantic. Joan falls into the rhythm of the place, the long hours, the silent meals, the constant ticking of time slipping away. She begins learning banburismus from the only person who truly commands it, Turing himself. The method is arcane, part mathematics, part instinct, part art. Analysts sort thousands of perforated sheets, Banbury sheets, into patterns hoping to detect tiny alignments that reveal which rotor orders the Germans used that day. Most people require months to master it. Joan learns the logic in a week. Her colleagues watch her work with a quiet respect they do not yet speak aloud. She does not complain when the heaters fail or when the hut grows so cold that breath fogs in the air. She does not react when men twice her age question her calculations, only to discover she was right. She does not mention the loss carved into her heart. She arrives early, stays late, and remembers everything. One evening, After most of the hut has drifted back to their quarters, Turing lingers by her desk. "You see the chains quicker than anyone," he says, referring to the long probabilistic sequences Banburismus depends on. "Better than I do." Coming from Turing, this is not flattery, it is recognition. Joan nods, surprised but moved. She senses the isolation in him, the distance, the relentless perfectionism, the feeling of living half inside the mind and half outside the world. Perhaps that is why they understand each other so easily. They are both brilliant, both misfits, both carrying burdens no one else can see. Yet the work is not only intellectual, it is emotional in ways she never expected. Joan soon learns that every delay in Hut 8 has consequences far beyond the wooden walls around her. When they fail to decode U-boat messages in time, convoys die. Merchant ships vanish beneath torpedoes. Hundreds of sailors do not return. The casualty lists arrive quietly, never shown to the team, but whispered between senior staff like a sickness. She hears enough to know when the fault lies in Hut 8's failures. It weighs on her, silently. Every miscalculation feels like a hand slipping from a lifeline. One afternoon, an officer from naval intelligence arrives with grim news. U-boats have shifted their attack patterns. The Germans adapt faster than anticipated. Losses are mounting. Britain's supply lines are straining. And now there is confirmation of a new threat. B-Dienst, the German naval codebreaking unit, has successfully decrypted British naval ciphers. The ocean is becoming a duel of invisible minds, and Britain is losing. The revelation sharpens the urgency in Hut 8. Turing sits for hours staring at a single message. Welchman drafts new ideas for communication security. The atmosphere thickens with the sense that time itself is becoming scarce. But Joan, despite the pressure, works with calm precision. She dissects messages, traces rotor patterns, marks contradictions in red pencil. She senses details others overlook, a repeated letter that should not repeat, an operator's small, consistent mistake, a habitual weather phrase used by a careless U-boat commander. She gathers these fragments like threads, weaving them into something coherent. On her third week, she identifies an alignment error in a set of Banbury sheets that no one else noticed. The correction shortens the attack chain by hours. Suddenly the day's key becomes solvable. Turing takes the sheet from her hands, stares at it, and smiles for the first time in days. "That changes everything," he says. That night, they break the naval key schedule before midnight for the first time in weeks. Naval intelligence moves immediately, dispatching new convoy routes and altering escort formations. The next morning, reports arrive of a U-boat wolfpack that found nothing but empty ocean. Joan feels a quiet triumph, but she does not show it. She folds her papers, resets her pencils, and prepares for the next cycle. Victory in this place lasts no longer than a breath. Yet, as the work grows heavier, she also starts to understand the strange duality of life at Bletchley. There is relentless secrecy and crushing fatigue, but also rare moments of warmth, midnight tea in chipped mugs, whispered jokes about the cold, the sense of being bound together by a purpose no one else can comprehend. One night, after the last bomb run finishes, Turing walks her to the door. "People will never know what we've done," he says. "They will only know that we lived through it." Joan looks back at the dim shape of the hut, the walls where lives are saved by numbers no one will ever read. "That's enough," she answers quietly. She means it. She has never cared for recognition, but she cares deeply for the men whose lives hang on the fragile lines of intercepted messages waiting to be solved. In a world where her grief has no outlet, the work becomes a way to keep moving. And somewhere in the cold Atlantic darkness, beneath thousands of tons of water, a U-boat commander listens for convoy engines and hears nothing but silence. The woman he will never know is already rewriting his fate. The first hint that something has changed arrives quietly in the form of an intercepted naval message that looks ordinary. Same structure, same length, same clipped German phrasing, but the numbers refuse to behave. The Banbury sheets don't align, the cribs don't fit, the chains break apart halfway through every calculation. Joan studies the figures with a sinking feeling. The Germans have upgraded their naval Enigma. Word travels through Bletchley Park in shifting murmurs. Some say the Kriegsmarine has added new plugboard procedures, others fear a redesigned daily key schedule. But within hours, the truth emerges. The German Navy has begun deploying a modified machine with an extra rotor. The four-rotor Enigma. Faster, tighter, with more permutations than anything Hut 8 has faced. It is, in every practical sense, a wall. Convoy losses surge, U-boats lash out across the North Atlantic, wolf packs tighten around merchant lines like steel jaws. Intelligence officers arrive demanding answers, but Hut 8 has none. Banburismus collapses under the increased complexity. The bomb machines, mechanical giants built to tear through possible rotor orders, struggle against the expanded space of possibilities. The pressure becomes unbearable, mistakes mean deaths, and the deaths are rising. Joan refuses to yield to panic. She studies the four-rotor problem until her eyes blur, running chain after chain, seeking patterns deep beneath the surface chaos. The logic feels different now, more deceptive, more calculated, as if the enemy has learned their rhythm and is inviting them to fail. Nights grow longer, days blur into each other, meals are forgotten, sleep a distraction. Turing retreats into silence, working with the intensity of a man staring down a beast that has found its second wind. Joan works beside him, calm and steady, her pencil tracing threads no one else sees. One evening she receives a set of messages from the Bay of Biscay. They seem normal, routine transmissions between U-boats and command. But something in their structure bothers her. A repeated sequence, a subtle rhythm. A pattern of operator laziness, or perhaps exhaustion, hidden inside the lines. She copies the messages by hand, aligning them vertically, something she used to do as a child when solving number puzzles. Slowly, she feels the shape of the hidden structure. Not a mistake, but a habit. The same operator has reused a specific greeting phrase across multiple days, a tiny lapse in discipline. Such flaws are gold in cryptanalysis. She brings the sheet to Turing. He studies it for a long moment. If this is consistent, he says, it might reduce the number of plugboard settings we need to test. It is consistent, Joan replies. The operator uses the same phrasing whenever transmitting to BDU. He doesn't realize his opening blocks are predictable. Turing looks at her with a quiet admiration that few people ever receive from him. This might be what we need. They begin constructing a new chain, testing rotor offsets against the habitual sequence. Hours pass, the heaters rattle. Wind presses against the blackout curtains. The hut feels like a ship drifting through darkness. And then around 2 a.m, Joan finds it. A match. A clean, perfect alignment that reduces a labyrinth of possibilities into a narrow path. For the first time since the four-rotor Enigma appeared, they have a foothold. They attack the key schedule from that foothold with renewed force. Bomb machines thunder through the night. Analysts race to test new combinations. Joan refines the chain over and over, tightening its predictive power until errors collapse. Just after dawn, Hut 8 breaks a German naval key for the first time in weeks. The news travels to naval intelligence instantly. A wolf pack is stalking a slow-moving convoy south of Greenland. Now, for the first time in days, Britain knows exactly where the U-boats are. Convoy escorts are rerouted. Destroyers sweep into the area. The U-boats, expecting isolated, unprotected ships, find themselves ambushed instead. 3 submarines are forced deep, 2 damaged, and 1 defeated entirely. Dozens of merchant ships survive because a German radio operator was tired, and Joan Clarke was not. But the victory carries a strange weight. Later that same night, when she returns to her quarters, she realizes the date, March 12, 1941. the anniversary of the day she received the telegram about the death that changed her life. While she worked through numbers in silence, something inside her had remembered without needing to speak. She sits at her small desk, the single lamp casting a dim glow, and lets herself feel the grief she has kept buried. Not for long. Just enough to remind herself why she keeps going. The war has taken enough from her. She will not let it take her purpose too. In the days that follow, the breakthrough becomes the foundation for deeper attacks on the four-rotor system. Joan's method for identifying operator habits is quietly integrated into Hut 8's workflow. Her colleagues adopt her alignment strategies. Her calculations appear on nearly every desk. Still, her name rarely appears in the official paperwork. Bletchley Park is filled with brilliant men whose reputations will someday adorn bookshelves. Joan works without any expectation of fame, but the people inside the hut know the truth. When the next four-rotor key collapses in record time, a young analyst whispers to a colleague, "She's the reason we've caught up. Without her, we'd still be in the dark." Joan pretends she doesn't hear him. She simply turns another message over, marks down the next series of alignments, and begins again. The war does not give her time to rest. U-boats change tactics constantly. Messages increase in length and frequency. Weather in the Atlantic disrupts transmissions. Some days are dead ends, others feel like steps backward. But Joan remains steady, patient, relentless. Her greatest strength is not genius alone, it is endurance. Late one night, Hut 8 is hit with a flood of high-priority intercepts. Reports suggest U-boat wolfpacks have coordinated for a massive strike. Analysts scramble to decode the transmissions. Turing is exhausted. The team is stretched thin. Joan moves between desks, clarifying patterns, pointing out contradictions, correcting logical assumptions with quiet authority. She is not the loudest or most forceful person in the hut, but she is the one everyone gravitates toward when the pressure becomes unbearable. Just before dawn, she deciphers a string of rotor indicators that unlock the final piece of the day's solution. Her voice remains calm as she reads out the settings, even though she knows what they represent: the movement of dozens of submarines preparing to strike. Naval intelligence acts immediately. Britain moves convoys out of the trap in time. Another disaster avoided. By now, Joan senses the tide shifting. The four-rotor Enigma is no longer an unsolvable wall. It is a puzzle, difficult, dangerous, but one she has begun to understand intimately. The Germans believe their machine is unbreakable. They believe the Atlantic belongs to them. They believe mathematics is on their side. They do not know that a woman inside a wooden hut in Buckinghamshire is dismantling their certainty line by line. Joan leaves Hut 8 as the first light softens the sky. She walks through the mist rising over the grounds, exhausted but steady, knowing she will face the same battle again in a few hours. But tonight, just for a moment, she allows herself to feel something she has not felt in a long time: hope. By the spring of 1943, the four-rotor Enigma no longer feels like an impossible mountain. It feels like a mountain they can climb, but only if they climb it every single day, without rest, without error. The work becomes a strange kind of war within a war. Outside Bletchley Park, the Luftwaffe bombs coastal cities, U-boats strike convoys, armies clash from North Africa to the Eastern Front. Inside Hut 8, the weapons are pencils, probability charts, and sleepless nights. Joan knows she is close to something decisive. The Germans are changing their procedures again: new rotor start points, new plugboard habits, tighter discipline. They are adapting, learning from their mistakes, yet every change they make leaves a trace, a tiny distortion in the pattern. She studies these like a cartographer mapping invisible terrain. One morning, Hut 8 receives a batch of messages intercepted during heavy U-boat activity in the North Atlantic. Merchant ships are disappearing again, escorts are overstretched. Churchill has demanded answers. British intelligence fears the Germans have refined their cipher beyond reach. The analysts around her begin to worry. Even Turing seems distracted, lost in a maze of equations he can't yet untangle. But Joan doesn't panic. She lays out the intercepts in a long row on the desk, aligning them as if she were laying out a timeline of the enemy's thoughts. Something catches her eye. A sequence of weather reports transmitted from BDU headquarters to several U-boats. They appear ordinary: wind direction, visibility, sea conditions. But one detail stands out: a repeated error in the spelling of bewölkt, the German word for cloudy. The operator has typed it inconsistently across multiple messages. A small inconsistency, but in cryptanalysis, small mistakes become highways into the truth. Her pulse quickens. She isolates the pattern, strips away the redundant indicators, and begins a new Banburismus chain from scratch. The numbers fall into place like they've been waiting for her. She calls Turing and Meade over. "Look at this," she says, sliding her notes toward them. The operator reuses the same incorrect spelling 3 times. That creates a forced alignment across the indicators. Meade stares at the page. That can't be right. That would narrow the rotor positions by nearly a third. "It does," Joan replies calmly, and the chain holds across all messages. Turing's eyes widen, not with surprise, but with the kind of recognition that only comes when someone shows him a solution he wishes he had thought of first. Moments later, the hut erupts into motion. Sheets are pulled, rotors tested, bombs set spinning. Joan returns to her desk and begins refining the chain. Every minute counts. Outside, the world is unaware that dozens of ships are balanced on the edge of an algorithm. Hours later, they have it. The complete naval key. When Hut 8 confirms the solution, naval intelligence reacts instantly. Convoys are rerouted just in time. Escorts race toward the coordinates, where a wolf pack expects helpless merchant ships. Instead, the hunters sail straight into an ambush. Depth charges fill the sea with thunder. German commanders panic. Several U-boats are damaged. One is forced to surface under gunfire. Others flee into the darkness, blind to the fact that their most protected secret, their four-rotor Enigma, has been shattered. But Joan doesn't celebrate. She steps away from the noise and sits on a bench outside the hut. The victory feels heavy, not exhilarating. She knows what these messages represent. Men trapped inside submarines as steel groans around them. Sailors clinging to hope on the decks of merchant ships. Commanders making desperate decisions based on fragments of information. Every solution she finds reshapes the fate of men she will never meet. The weight of that responsibility begins to grind against her. She can feel the exhaustion in her bones, the grief she has ignored pressing at the edges again. There are nights when she returns to her quarters and cannot sleep, because she knows that one mistake tomorrow could mean a ship sinking in the dark. Around this time, an uncomfortable truth becomes impossible to ignore. Despite her breakthroughs, despite her rising reputation inside the hut, Joan remains classified as a linguist on paper, a cover title assigned to women to keep their work concealed. She earns less than the men sitting beside her. She holds no formal title. She cannot tell her family what she does. Most of Britain believes she is a clerk at a government office. Only the men in Hut 8 know that she is the mind who has begun turning the tide in the Atlantic. One afternoon, the strain finally catches up with her. She misreads a rotor setting and has to recalculate an entire chain. It costs the hut 3 precious hours. She stays behind after shift, staring at the error until her hands tremble. Turing finds her there long after sunset. "No one is perfect," he says. "Not even me." "That's not how the war works," she replies. "Lives depend on our precision." Lives. The word hangs in the dim air of the hut. They both know what it means. This is a war fought by invisible mathematicians, whose victories will never be known, and whose mistakes will never be forgiven. Yet she continues, day after day, quiet, steady, brilliant. Then comes the moment that changes everything. June 1943. Hut 8 intercepts a burst of unusually long German messages. Their structure is wrong, their tone urgent. Something is happening in the Atlantic, something large. Joan feels it immediately, the tension in the operator's hands, the panic threaded through the encryptions. She dives into the messages with a cold, focused clarity she has never felt before. Within hours, she identifies a misalignment in the German operator's use of the new rotor order, a subtle flaw that exposes the entire cipher like a crack in glass. She exploits it ruthlessly, stripping away layers of encryption until the core truth emerges. A massive wolf pack, dozens of U-boats, is preparing to strike a convoy that has no idea death is coming. She works through the night, pushing calculations until her fingers ache. When the final settings fall into place, she hands the solution to Turing without a word. He stares at her handwriting for a long time.
"You've saved them," he says softly. "All of them."
Naval Command acts immediately. Escorts sprint toward the trap. Aircraft are rerouted. The convoy changes course under cover of darkness. When the U-boats converge, they find nothing but empty ocean. The largest coordinated attack planned by the Kriegsmarine that month collapses. Joan goes back to her desk. No one will ever know. Not the sailors whose lives she preserved, not the families who will receive no telegram, not the government that will credit code-breaking efforts without naming the woman who made them possible. She folds the intercepts neatly, places them in the secure bin, and walks out into the cold night air. The blackout sky above Bletchley Park is silent, indifferent, unaware of her triumph. She closes her eyes. Tomorrow the Germans will send new messages. Tomorrow she will break them.
When the war finally begins to tilt in the Allies' favor, Joan barely notices at first. The news from North Africa, from Sicily, from the Atlantic, victories that electrify the rest of Britain, feel distant inside Bletchley Park's wooden walls. Her reality is still the same narrow desk, still the same hurried intercepts, still the same ritual of working until logic conquers chaos.
But the tide has changed, and deep inside she knows she played a part in moving it. By late 1944, the Kriegsmarine's confidence is fading. U-boats are hunted relentlessly, their wolf pack scattered, their most protected cipher rendered unreliable. Convoys travel with increasing safety. The sea, once a graveyard, is beginning to belong to Britain again. The four-rotor Enigma never recovers. Inside Hut 8, analysts work with a new kind of pressure, not fear now, but the weight of a war that draws closer to its end. Rumors circulate that Germany is collapsing. The bombs fall on Berlin. Allied troops cross the Rhine. Every day brings more messages, but they feel less like threats and more like fragments of an empire unraveling. And then in May 1945, the transmission stopped. No final boast, no declaration, just silence. The war in Europe ends without ceremony in Joan's hut. One moment, the clatter of typewriters fills the room. The next, the operators pause, listening to the absence of noise on the wireless bands. Editors gather around the sets, waiting for a signal that never comes. Joan sits quietly, hands still on her papers. For years, she has lived inside a conflict measured in ciphertext, probabilities, and the cold mathematics of survival. Now the messages are gone, and with them the invisible battlefield that shaped her life. In the weeks that follow, Bletchley Park begins to dismantle itself. Machines are dismantled, papers burned, buildings emptied. Staff receive stern instructions. Nothing spoken here may ever be repeated, not to friends, not to parents, not to spouses. The Official Secrets Act binds them tighter than any uniform. Joan signs without hesitation. She has always known this day would come. She knew it the moment she first stepped into Hut 8. Victory, if it ever came, would be shared only in silence. One by one, her colleagues drift back to their old lives. Some return to universities, others to civil service or industry. Turing moves into new research, chasing ideas decades ahead of their time. Welchman leaves to build entire fields of communication science. But Joan faces a different world. Bletchley Park gave her a place where brilliance mattered more than gender. Outside its gates, the old rules return instantly. Mathematics posts are limited. Women are expected to step aside for returning servicemen. Civil service roles are restricted. The war has ended, but the barriers remain exactly where she left them. She does not complain. Instead, she continues her work quietly, moving into cryptanalysis roles under the government communications headquarters, where secrecy still defines every day. Her contributions remain hidden, locked behind classification for decades. She never speaks of the war, not about the nights she saved convoys, not about the keys she dismantled, not about the four-rotor Enigma she broke when no one else could. In her lifetime, she receives modest recognition, appointments, commendations, polite acknowledgements of service. But the world never sees the full scope of what she accomplished. History, for many years, tells the story of Alan Turing, Gordon Welchman, Tommy Flowers. The names are deserved but incomplete. And Joan Clarke, one of the greatest codebreakers of her generation, remains an asterisk, a footnote, a whisper. It is not until the 1970s, when secrecy laws begin to relax, that fragments of the truth emerge. Former staff of Bletchley Park start to publish memoirs. Historians uncover old security papers. Researchers discover evidence of the silent army of women who held Britain's intelligence system together. Joan's name finally appears, not as a clerk or assistant, but as a cryptanalyst whose work shaped the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. By then, she is an older woman, private as ever. She gives a few interviews, precise, understated, almost apologetic in tone. She never exaggerates, she never claims credit. She simply states what she remembers, always careful to honor the men she worked beside. But those who listen closely can hear something else beneath her modesty. The quiet truth that she was one of the few who could stand alongside the brightest minds of the century as an equal. In her later years, she lives peacefully in Headington, Oxfordshire, surrounded by books, papers, and the quiet she has always preferred. When she dies in 1996 at the age of 79, obituaries mention her collaboration with Turing, her exceptional mind, her service to the nation. But they cannot capture the depth of what she carried, the burden of knowing how many lives she saved and how many memories she had to keep locked away. Her story, like so much of Bletchley Park, was almost lost. Almost. Today, when historians revisit the war, when students learn about Enigma, when documentaries speak the names of those who fought their battles in silence, Joan Clarke's name rises from the shadows, not as a forgotten assistant, not as a footnote in someone else's legacy, but as a woman whose brilliance struck directly at the heart of Hitler's war machine. And though she never sought recognition, one truth endures. Thousands of men lived because she refused to surrender to grief, doubt, or silence. She broke the most complex cipher of the war while carrying a loss she never allowed to break her. In the quiet world of cryptanalysis, where victories are invisible and heroes unnamed, Joan Clarke's triumph stands unshaken, one of the greatest acts of intelligence and endurance the war ever produced.